Hi, and thank you for listening to this second episode of Mediumystic. I'm your host, Kristen Harlow. Today, I sit down with intuitive medium, psychopomp, and tarot reader Dana DeCicco to discuss reincarnation, the evolution of humanity, shamanic journeying, and so much more. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. Dana, thank you for sitting down with me today. You and I met because we share the same mentor, right? And we began practicing mediumship at pretty much the same time, maybe a little bit of variation there, but I think pretty much at the same time we started practicing and working with our connection to spirit. And you have such a rich creative connection to spirit, a really intelligent connection to spirit that is just, it's palpable when you're delivering a message, because you are also a member of my weekly meetup group where we practice our mediumship skills. And so I see you work a lot, and it's just, like I said, it's palpable, your intelligence and your creativity. And one of the ways that you express your spiritual gifts is by engaging your psychopomp nature, right? You call yourself a psychopomp. Would you,
I do.
yeah, would you talk about that a little bit for the people listening who might not know what that means or would like a little more detail about it?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just want to thank you for those words. Them coming from you means the world to me.
Oh,
It
thank you.
truly, truly does. It's interesting. You asked me if I call myself a psychopomp. I do, but I've been thinking about that's a word most people they just don't know what it means. They do not know what it is. They have no accessibility to it. They don't have a context for it. I think that I wonder sometimes if I would do myself more justice to call myself a rescue medium.
Mm,
You know, I'm really thinking about the origins of where everything comes from, and I came across a memory I had of doing psychopomp services as a child. But I had no idea what I was doing then. I had no context or no anything for it. I've always seen and sensed spirits from a young age. It's probably safe to say there wasn't a time when I never did, But I also learned really early on that it wasn't something that you talked about. It
hmm
wasn't something that people were going to understand.
hmm
And I think, there was a lot of shutting away of myself, and there was a lot of fear that got tangled up in that. But I remember a moment being in bed late at night, and spirits used to come and they would come around my bed, and I would see them. Sometimes they would be in the room, sometimes they'd be at the foot of the bed, sometimes they would be next to me. I remember one time seeing a spirit as a child floating above me.
mm,
Um, and there was a woman that was connected to the house. And at the time, I didn't understand any of this, but I can piece it together as an adult, with the perspective that I have. And she would show up in my room at night, and she would watch me. And I just remember her seeming so sad. She scared me. She was sad and she scared me. And she kind of had on a long kind of like white nightgownish thing. And I can remember this very vividly. I think I could access my memories visually, so I kind of like a snapshot of them. And I can see her standing there. She had this weird sort of scrunchy thing on her head, which I know now is something women put on their head when they went to bed for the oils of their hair and things like this. And I remember one night, her standing there and staring at me. And I remember all of a sudden at the foot of my bed was a window. And I remember the light opening up in the window. And the light was so bright. It was as if you took sunlight. It was as if you were staring directly into the sun, but it was in my bedroom in the window in the middle of the night. And
mm.
that light opened. And she went into it, she went into it. And I truly believe that my guides as a child helped me to do this work. They helped me
Wow.
because I think there had to be some sort of release for it. like I think, I think I think I spent a lot of my childhood walking that line between, being fascinated by it and being afraid of it,
Hmm.
and I realized that, I was crossing spirits, or at least one time I crossed a spirit as a child, and I had no clue what I was doing. I had no clue what happened.
What is the feeling that you get, or how does it work when you recognize that a spirit requires crossing? What happens in that moment?
I would say spirits that need to be crossed, they feel different. We've had so many times where we've worked together, whether it's shamanic journeying or just working in circle together, where we sense all the different types of spirits that can come to us, whether it's a guide or angelic beings or extraterrestrial energy, elementals, and they all have a little bit of a different feeling to them. Um,
Yeah.
Kind of like the way you eat something tastes different. If you have something salty or sour or sweet, And for me, I would say there is, when you have a spirit that needs to be crossed, it could be a feeling of anxiety in the air, or a feeling of a stomach ache, or some sort of, I may feel a way in which they felt when they died, maybe
Hmm.
the feeling of the impact if they were hit by a car, or the feeling of it hurting where they may have been shot. That was a real struggle for me in the beginning. That was something our mentor really helped me work through. It was a real struggle because it scared me so much. It's hard to have your body not be your own body anymore. I think too, when we talk about a psychopomp, when we talk about, someone consciously and aware, with awareness facing their own death, that they have, whether it's through illness or whatever other reason may be causing it, it's, I can't, the journey to that is, I can only imagine how insanely hard and difficult that would be. But it also holds a possibility for a great gift too, because you can do the work, or find the tools, or find the person around you to help you with that. There's people out there who do the work, death doulas who work with people that are in that process. And then I've thought about doing that, and it feels like maybe not the right fit for me, but at the end of the day, but I think it's important when we talk about a psychopomp to really think about what are the conditions in which someone makes someone get to the point that they haven't crossed over to the other side. What is that thing that puts someone in that limbo?
Hmm.
And it's usually it's a death that's, sudden, it's a death that's unexpected, a death that's violent, a death that is like so unjustifiably unfair, whatever that reason is, or maybe it's something that happened in their life, a forgiveness that they don't think they're going to get when they cross into the light, or a fear of where they're going to go. I think there's so many things tied up into that.
Yeah.
And what that light is, I think I can only speak to what I've sensed or I've seen, or, spirits showing me, but I mean, that's kind of the greatest mystery, and I think that it's not the same for everybody. I mean, I think it is, whenever that light gets opened up, there's certain common things that always happen. There's always beings that come to greet someone, right? Whether they're loved ones or spirit guides, or animals, ancestors, famous people.
Hmm.
I've seen come too that have
Hmm.
passed,
You
Um,
made me think of a story about my father who was on his deathbed for 5 years. He suffered with the same disease that Bruce Willis has, called frontotemporal dementia. And actually, they've discovered recently that it seems like it could possibly be an immune disease, not a brain disease, and that the cells of the brain are being eaten away. But that's not guaranteed, of course. And I don't understand the complexity of it. But anyway, my father was in the state of infancy for about 5 years. My mother took care of him all day, every day. He was at home. And on the night that his aunt, my great aunt Etta, passed away, he had some kind of attack. So it seemed like it could have been a stroke of some kind, or something like that, but it happened at the exact time that his aunt passed, and he was very close to her. But it was just so interesting, and we were certain that he must have um connected with her in some way as she passed. It just seemed so clear. And so yeah, I think everybody has that kind of encounter in the transition. Steve Jobs's last words were wow, wow, wow. You know, what did he see? What did he feel? What did he know in that moment? So
Mm,
you mentioned death doulas.
yeah.
Would you share for people listening who might not really know what a death doula does, exactly what they do from your perspective, at least?
Yeah, I mean, to me, a death doula, and yeah, I've read books about it. I've listened to podcasts. I really immersed myself in it because I wanted to understand if this was a path I thought I might want to take. A death doula is someone who works with someone who's in the process of dying to offer them support, to offer them guidance, to help them, unpack and understand the situation they're going through, and really gets them ready to make that crossing. They work not only with the person that's in the process of passing, but they work with family members, loved ones. They if we all know what doulas do during childbirth, right? It's a similar thing. Instead of meeting the child coming in, we're meeting the person going out.
Hmm.
And they have to be able to hold this immense space for someone. And most deaf doulas, work from a place of being able to connect easily with the other side. They're people who work as a psychopomp but aren't focused on lost souls, so focused on the living.
Mm.
Um, you know, but even when we work with lost souls, we're still focused on the living. They're still people. They're just in a different phase of
Of peoplehood.
that themselves. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
I think there are some death doulas who actually train with shamans. I think there's actually a particular woman, and I can't remember her name, who offers this training to actually walk the path of death with the person that they're sitting with. So they don't just sit and provide services for the family and help negotiate through some of the emotional crises that occur when you're losing someone, and they don't just sit and hold the hand of the person who's passing and help there to be beauty and peace around them as the process unfolds, but they also go with the person as they're crossing and walk with them as far as they can. And it makes me think of uh the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and the belief that there are phases after we pass, that it's not just goodbye, it's that you travel through certain dimensions, energies, phases, and you experience them. And the more peacefully you can experience them, the easier the transition is going to be. And perhaps if you believe in this aspect of Buddhism, that you can reincarnate into an easier existence because of the peace that you experienced as you got there.
Yes, absolutely. They're working through stages of things. They're surrendering into death, I think, as our crossing. And as you surrender and you let go into the death, I've seen people and I've seen spirits show me some people go to this place that almost resembles a hospital or a recovery home, and they need to recover from this life, from
Mhm.
the traumas, from the pain, from the way they died, from just all these things that happened to us here.
Just like a
Um,
baby who's born into this world needs to recover for months after the birth. It's the same thing. Yeah.
the fourth trimester, right? As a mother, that's something I saw with my own child. I saw that not only her going through that process, but myself needing to go through that process.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, the birth I had, that was a major floodgate for me in terms of my ability as an intuitive.
Mhm.
I had learned how to fold things away. I
Mhm.
think within these abilities and these ways of looking at things, that once I had my daughter, I couldn't fold it away anymore, and there was a
Mhm.
million reasons why I couldn't. It was a pain. It was the physicality of the pain. It was the emotional aspect of the pain. It was the transition. It was, I think, walking this line between life and death, and that I needed to have an emergency C-section.
Uh-huh.
So it was, after 2 days of labor, that's where I wound up.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, and I can still remember the moment of having my daughter, and I'm telling this story because there's something else that I think ties into it, but to come out and say it isn't gonna make sense unless I tell the story. I remember, being on that, operating table, and I didn't feel anything. I had, was, you know, completely numb, but I could feel this sort of tugging as they were, on my body as they were, bringing her into
Mm.
this world. And when they cut you open, there's blood that comes out. And I remember hearing the blood hit the floor. And there's something I think too in the power of our experiences sometimes when we die or we give birth or we do things that's connected to the blood, and connected to the life in there. And I think um for me, there's something in that that I'm kind of working through and understanding, what that is about, my story and how I work too.
Hmm.
Um, and I also had growing up a near death experience,
I
and
was
I
going to
think,
ask you. That's exactly what I was about to say.
yeah, I had wound up rupturing my spleen. I fell on something, and I was in the intensive care. I needed to have an intensive care unit, needed to have a blood transfusion. And I remember the feeling of the blood coming into my body. I could, this sort of coldness and this sort
Mm,
of, but there was something energetic there. And I had no words or tools to describe what that meant at the time. I was 14, about to be 15, but still, like, that's no difference really. And I remember being in this sort of altered state. I remember, I knew that I wasn't like in the land of the living anymore. Like I knew I wasn't in the same world, but I also wasn't dead either. And I remember beings coming around me, around me in the hospital bed, and feeling this. And there's so many beings, and there was this sort of love and acceptance that I don't think I ever really had felt in my life, before that. And that was a time in my life when the experiences I had as a child, I had kind of started to learn how to fold them away and not deal with them. And I learned what worked. There was tricks, if I sleep with the lights on, I'm not
hmm.
going to see them. If I'm going to do this, I'm not going to see them. And things came flooding back to me after that, in the sense that that's when they started to turn things up a notch. But it really wasn't until I had my daughter that I was ready to face it,
Mm.
that I was ready to really own it, that I realized I had no other choice but to deal with
Right,
it.
right. There's no choice here. You better own
Yeah.
it because
Yeah.
here it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And the idea of it being both an emotional and physical pain that creates such a level of suffering in that moment, and the fact that that can become a floodgate, I think is not uncommon. I know it's not
Hmm.
uncommon, and it's all varying levels of pain. It's interesting that you had your near death experience at the age of 14, 15, which is of course the age where you would be considered someone who is becoming a woman or becoming a man, and that's when in many cultures
Yeah.
the idea of being pushed into a faux near death experience to make them become adults,
Yeah.
was so common. And
Yeah.
it just makes me think of that. Um,
But imagine we lived in a society still where we understood that, where we still lived in a way that maybe felt more connected to the other side, to
mhm.
nature, to the world around us. And we still had the belief in these rituals and holding this space and offering this mentorship and support and educating people on these things that maybe I could have flourished and blossomed at that time. For me, the anchoring connection of the past lives that we've had, and I use the word past because they're not really in the past, right? They're all unfolding in this
Right now.
one unified moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful way to put it. This one unified moment. I love that. But right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when we do this work, that's what we're chasing, right? We're chasing the oneness of everything. Like how
Mhm,
we're all really connected,
mhm.
how we can all really connect with each other. And that's all we're doing when we work with people, right? We're just holding space for those moments and those stories.
Yep. 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 It's
Yeah.
like I don't know what we are doing when we are working with spirit, when we are working in the circle, when I sit with someone, when you sit with someone. I don't know what we're doing exactly. Are we connecting to the spirit of a past human being? Are we connecting to their energy imprint that they've left behind, and a specific story that they want told that has remained? Are we connecting to the person we're sitting with, memories of that person? Are we connecting to the energy of that? So that I never purport to know exactly what's going on. What is your what do you think evil is? Do you think that evil is an entity? Do you think that it is the reflection of the collective unconscious and all of the suffering and pain that we hold within that is not processed and goes out into the world and creates these behaviors and actions? Is it energetic? What do you think it is? It's a big question,
Um,
but
it's a huge question, and it's one I've actually really had to think about after some experiences I had. I think evil is the unrecognized shadow. It's a shadow that we haven't allowed ourselves to see, or it's part of the shadow of the lessons we need to learn or the experiences we need to have. I don't think anything is without the possibility of light going into it.
let's define what evil is. You know what I mean? Like what are we referring to here? Are we you know what I mean? Like, because to me evil is the outcome, an act that results from a certain state of being.
I think there are beings in this world that do work to influence people,
Mhm.
to do things that are maybe not 100% in the element of their control, that they're darker beings in this world, but I still think somewhere in there, there's that light or the
Absolutely.
ability to bring it to it, you know?
I think it can be transmuted. I think that energy can be
Mhm,
transmuted. I do think it's a real thing, but
mhm,
and I agree that there's still light in it, and I also agree that there's also partially here uh just a process of healing that has to take place for humans, and that's how it's being expressed. The
yeah,
Maybe it's partially that humans have such a hard time. We have such a hard time facing our emotions still, that we don't process things, and we teach our children to, stop crying, be quiet, don't show so much of this and that and hide this and that.
mhm,
So we learn this, and all of us across the board, I think, even those with the best intentions to try and help us not hide. We live in a society that expects us to hide a lot of things. And so maybe that hiding is what creates this energy of this very raucous, dangerous, explosive energy that creates these actions that we just
absolutely. We all have went through and are still going through processes of ourselves that we feel we need to hide, you know, and then I think that for me, that I'm at the point of my focus is the integration of all of these things into my life. So I don't have to feel like being an intuitive or a medium is separate than being a mother or a wife or a boss at work or a daughter, that I can integrate this side of myself into all aspects of my life, you know, by
Mhm.
being having, we learn to trust, but we also have to learn and trust to be who we are, you know, and I think um guess I'm not sure how I got that out of what you're saying, but I
Well,
think it's all connected, you know?
I also want to note that as you were talking, I heard, I'm not sure if it was just sound, being deformed, like some kind of sound issue, or if it was a voice, but I made a voice out of it. I matrixed it at the very least, and it sounded like a voice
Mhm.
that said something and maybe even came close to saying your name, but I'm not sure. Yeah,
Interesting that you say they came close to saying my name. That is still to this day one of the ways I know I need to pay attention. I hear my name.
hmm
I hear it on the subway. I hear it at work. I hear
hmm
it in the night. You know, I hear it and I know
Yeah,
I need to pay attention.
I remember before I was fully connected with what with my own spiritual gifts and um expressing them the way that I do. I'd wake up or I'd be just about to fall asleep and I'd hear very clearly either my name or something else, a word
Mhm,
from in a totally different voice. And there are explanations for that. There are scientific explanations about the, chemicals or whatever's happening when you're about to drift off into sleep, but
mhm,
it wasn't only during those times that it would happen. But at the time before I came into myself as someone who is connected to and pursuing my spiritual gifts, it scared me. It was like, wow, what is that? It's just so clear right there. What is that? I'm sure there are many people listening to this now who would not call themselves mediums, don't even necessarily have a curiosity about it, who have
mhm.
experienced the exact same thing. I think many people experience that and choose to believe a lot of times the scientific explanation for it. But why not both? Why not both the scientific and the metaphysical explanation?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I think that's where the sweet spot is, you know what I'm saying? And I think the science is gonna prove this all one day.
Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know that we'll be around to experience it. Maybe we will. Things are moving quickly.
Maybe not in this lifetime, right? But
Right. In this,
yeah.
yeah. Maybe though. I mean, there's
Mhm.
still there's apparently even now there is the ability through AI to transfer consciousness from one place to another, so that however it works, my consciousness could be taken to your room, your house, and we could be
Mhm.
having this conversation face to face as opposed to
Wow. Yeah.
it was
Well,
something that was shown at some AI conference a few years ago that it's a true thing.
yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it. And kind of just look at where we kind of came from working. You know, we every week before the pandemic, we brought ourselves every Monday night to this same space to work
Mhm.
together in person,
Mhm.
right? And then the pandemic hit, so we were forced to move everything to the telephone. Nothing changed. If anything, I think something came that maybe wasn't there before in a way, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
And we understand that time and space and location, none of that means anything, right? So
Mhm.
why would something being in a computer having conscious any different than a body, right? Or it's just a container. It's all just a container.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that was the question though. Is it actually your consciousness or is it AI's version of your consciousness? So that's where the danger
Yeah,
comes
I
in.
don't know, but maybe the AI is something that will save us, you know?
Yeah.
Um
I still don't quite understand why it's such a dangerous thing. I'm sure I just don't I'm missing something probably. I kind of at
mhm.
this point look at it the same way. I think we've talked about this before, but I look at it the same way as someone who was experiencing electricity for the first time. They're so accustomed to candlelight and then suddenly you can turn the lights on and be completely awake at night and not have limitations of darkness, and how scary that was
Yeah.
for many people. I
Oh,
heard
yeah.
yeah, I heard a scientist who was on in a documentary about Tesla, was talking about he was old enough to have a grandmother or a great grandmother who he knew who experienced that transition of electricity. Maybe she lived in a town that was a little more remote or something, and so it was not as it happened much later, but she was still so nervous about electricity that she would use those little baby plugs on sockets because she feared that the energy was going to be seeping out of this outlet. So it's a similar, and I don't judge that because first of
Mhm.
all, maybe she's right, first of all. And second of all, um, it's only natural to fear something that changes things so dramatically. I think the reason that I don't see how it's dangerous is because I don't quite understand how it changes things so dramatically yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure, there are things we can do more easily, I know, and it can plan travel for you and this and that, things like that. But to me, I don't have the imagination yet to see where that could go. I'm sure at some point
Mhm.
that will shift and I'll recognize how dangerous it could become. Right now I don't see it, so
Yeah.
I just
Well,
look at it
I think
as
we bring the way we are to anything. So if we're someone who views the world as not a dangerous place, that we trust enough to see that love is ultimately what's going to come through. The light is what's going to come through. Even if we can acknowledge other things, then we're okay there. But the mind that doesn't have that ability to have that perception, they're gonna see the doom and gloom in everything around every corner, right?
yeah,
So it's yeah.
and
I feel like that's it.
I do understand that perspective because it it's hard to fathom the way that the powers that be uh appear to treat the common person, and the struggle for power and the way we're all always struggling for power and grasping at power. So it is easy to um to be pessimistic about where things are going when things feel so
Mhm.
pessimistic now, but I tend to agree with you. I think that we're evolving to a place where we are going to begin to see the love in all things, have compassion, have forgiveness, be willing to face
Yeah.
the truth in every moment and not blame. I think we're heading to that place, and therefore power will become less of
Yeah.
an object that we chase.
Yeah. I think too, something I think that is getting harder to kind of step away from when we look at everything, whether we're talking about spirits or psychopomp, and a lot of the work that we're doing in the last like maybe 2 years or so, really seeing the extraterrestrial, celestial contact kind of coming in, and the things that they're showing us, and seeing how ingrained with technology they are, and
Yeah.
how it is a huge part of whether it's from the ships that they're using, or the modes in which they're able to communicate or get here. They've embraced that side of things in a way that they're able to harness it. They're
Yeah.
able to use it in a way that is propelling not only their own consciousness and ascension forward. So like I want to see that possibility is there for us here on this planet.
Yeah, and just
um
just for the people who are listening, you mentioned earlier the shamanic journeys that we experienced. You mentioned some of the places that we went in those experiences. Would you just explain exactly what it is that we're doing, what that shamanic journeying is, and also then the way that those ETs present themselves in that process?
when I first started to do shamanic journeying, I worked with a shaman who had been working, doing this for maybe 30 or 40 years at this point. The first thing he did, was, he created the space. We set our intentions, he did some drumming, that kind of like brought me into a deeper space. And then I saw as what he was guiding me through as we walked through this fog, and once we went through the fog, it came into the first past life I ever experienced,
Mm,
with my own eyes, where it wasn't someone telling me the life that I had. It was the one that I saw from my own eyes. And he was saying something and I was seeing it. That moment, for the longest time when I journeyed, whether it was on my own or when I started to do group work with other people, I had to go through the fog to get there, right? I had to literally walk myself through the fog. And then it got to the point where now it's almost like it's not a switch we need to flip. It's almost we're just one thought or second away from being able to go into that plane of existence.
mhm.
It's just so wild and liberating to be able to be in this experience where you see what someone else is seeing.
Mhm. It is.
Yeah.
It's amazing how the experiences overlap in incredible ways. It really is.
It shows how connected we all are, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's very healing in the end as well. You feel as though you've learned something, gained something. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes, to do solo journeying is one thing, right?
Hmm.
And that has one purpose and one sort of something to teach you, and it's a deeply personal thing. It's where you're really focused on yourself. Not that you're not focused on yourself when you're doing journeys, because sometimes the journey becomes about you, and other people are holding this space for you, and they can see things you can't see. They can access information you can't access. They can help you work through your fears, and help you work through all of these things. And then they're doing it for you, and then you do it for them, and it becomes. And sometimes you're doing it for a spirit that needs to be crossed. Sometimes you're doing it for the collectiveness of humanity. After something happened or something's about to happen.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's just so rich, and it's like the whole world is contained within our ability to shamanic journey and to go really to I say we go to the other side. I think I think that that's accurate, but there's so many different other sides I think to go
Hmm.
to, right?
Yeah, it also feels like moving right to the center of something. It feels like the center of all that is, and just accessing something that we are being shown we need to access in that moment.
Absolutely. I recently did some I'm going to use the word channeling, but really it was probably just a shamanic journey that I was able to, really write as I was having the journey and get to it. And they brought me to a tree. They brought me to a base of a tree. Trees have been coming up a lot, I think, for me, not only lately, but on this journey that I'm on. And they showed me that, if we're sitting and at the base of a tree, it's almost like the middle world, right? Some version of the world we're on now. We can access that tree by climbing up it and going to the branches, and that's the upper world. That's our extension. And we can also take the roots and do the same thing and go to the underworld,
Hmm.
go to a place where the deceased and our ancestors are, and they showed me how this tree kind of became the center of it all, like the center of our gravitational point, where that was us in this moment, in this life, having this experience. But all of the other parts of the trees could be connected to all of these other experiences we could have, or these other places that we could have to go. But that was like the center kind of grounding point, because a tree is so grounding, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing like the energy of a tree to ground you and to pull you into the moment, to help you surrender into the present. And I
Mm-hmm.
think you can sometimes be journeying in this other world and be more present than you would if you were just firmly planted in this world without any spiritual experience going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's in those moments of presence that certain uh, energies or beings come through, as you mentioned, right? Um,
Hmm.
the ET energy seems to show up a lot through it, right? That's your
Oh,
experience of it.
absolutely. Yeah, the extraterrestrials, I think, are kind of, at least they appear to be, from the perception and the place that I'm in right now, they seem to be overarching somehow, connecting it all somehow.
Hmm.
Um, you know, um, and sometimes it's elementals that come through. For me right now, there's all this goddess energy coming in.
Mm,
That's right now like how the divine is packaging itself for me. But I know that that's not the only package that it has. The only experience that I've had, or the only experience that I will have. It's just what's kind of speaking to me now for a whole host of reasons.
hmm.
Then that's why doing shamanic journeying with intent, I think, is so important. It's great to go in open and to do whatever work that needs to be done, or to have whatever experience that you have to have. But the more we start to work with it consciously and start to really think about what we need from it, us having this conversation, being in a space and a society that allows us to have this conversation. If
Hmm.
we were women having this conversation 500 years ago, we would be hung or burned at a stake, or who knows what else, like,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
and in some ways it feels like too, if we look at our society too closely, we start to see the return of some of those things. But
Yeah.
that's why having these conversations and being open and honest and really speaking the truths of who we are, I think, is so important, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. It was amazing. What is your social media that you would like to share?
My social media is, my website is from shadowstolight.com. And you can also find me on Instagram, on that same handle,
So from shadows to light.
to
Okay.
light.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Dana. And to our
Thank you.
listeners, yes, absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you for joining. We love you.